this is Moby, exactly as he touched down for the first time in Ireland off the Woodford trailer. Have resisted the temptation to do anything yet, which has been quite frustrating. Don't even know whether the engine is running, although I have a strong suspicion everything looks pretty good in there, that it will run with some clean fuel. Ivalo's coming around later, and I promised him that he'd be there for the first turn of the key, so we'll find out about that in a little while. It's basically a Opel Kadett caravan, or estate as we call it in Ireland, that was built in Rüsselsheim in Germany in 1982, and over the following 2 years was converted into a mobility vehicle so that it can be used for a wheelchair in the back. I have been watching it online every time I've gone over to visit my wife's parents, my in-laws. For the last about 18 months I've been spotting it and was curious about it, but recently my uncle announced that it was his wish to come to Ireland. He lives in London. He's a wheelchair user, and this would be his first overseas holiday in about 20 years. And there's one shortcoming of his otherwise excellent modern mobility vehicle, is that the roof comes down quite low, and he's a very tall man in the chair. So he can't actually see out when he's been driven around, which would be an absolute crying shame with the kind of scenery that we live in here. And I want to be able to take him out touring, just as I did with my grandparents years ago before they passed away. I've been driving Kadetts for 20 years, and I also did the exact same thing with touring for my wife's brother and parents, and basically anyone that's visited me for the last 20 years has had the Kadett experience of this beautiful place of Beara where I live. So I wanted to be the exact same thing for my uncle. So this gave us the excuse, and with some support from him as well, we went out and we purchased this car in Wuppertal in Germany, and we brought it back on a trailer to Ireland. My father-in-law did check it out and did the negotiations to buy it, and did very well in those negotiations, and we got a great deal, and I hope that the seller Thorsten was also happy. There were only 2 owners of this car before Thorsten, who's a Kadett collector, and we've seen some of his great vehicles, and it has actually been looked after extremely well, and comes with all of its history. So really, you know, up until about, it looks like until Thorsten got it, and he had a plan for it, but unfortunately he wasn't able to follow through with that, sadly. The car was fully in service until 2012 with its previous 2 owners, and that's the original ad from when Thorsten bought it. I have the service books, which go all the way up to it was replaced, wasn't it, with this one? Yeah, so it went all the way up to just about 2,000 kilometers ago, so that's pretty cool. All the way back to when it first actually went into service in 1984. So that's pretty cool to have, and we also got the owner's manual with this car. So I now know that this is actually something that belongs down here. I've always wondered what this little slip of shape was in the cardboard below. So that's where the service history goes, right below the bonnet pull. As I said, it's an adaptation of the Opel Kadett estate caravan, same as a Mark I Astra estate as well. And what they essentially did was they cut through the rear floor and made in welded in a lowered box with some adaptations to the rear suspension, and they've also fitted hydraulics so that it can raise and lower, so that a wheelchair can drive into the back easily. Again, don't know whether the hydraulics, I think this is something to do with it here, this big red switch and a little one below it. We'll be experimenting with that soon, because we've got to get all that running. If there's problems with it, Castletown Bear, where I live, is probably the best place in Ireland to get hydraulics fixed, because it's a major fishing port, and there's a lot of expertise in that area. So I'm not afraid of sorting that out. There's various options I can do. If the engine isn't right, I can swap in that excellent engine that I had reconditioned by Cork Engine Centre a couple of years ago. It's the same size as this one. I have to have this car ready in August, so it's mid-April now, so I haven't a huge amount of time. If I have to swap things over, I will, to take a shortcut and just get it right, and perhaps do a full restoration afterwards. But the interesting thing is, the more I look at this car, I had expected the worst, and it looks an awful lot better than I thought. And even just going through the history, knowing that it's been looked after very well up to 6 years, and although it was stored outside for the previous 6 years, it was still on dry ground, and seems to have been moved, even if it was just pushed around regularly. But it hasn't been started in quite some time, and I suspect that the fuel in the modified fuel tank, this is one of the other things, when they cut through the floor, they removed the petrol tank and moved it into a box, which is just behind me here, behind the driver's seat, and that's in an isolated steel box, with a different location for the filler neck on the outside. And again, that allows that extra floor space for the wheelchair to come in. Other than those modifications, the roof must have been cut off, and then they made up a raised section and replaced the same roof. It looks like the exact same roof as George, so it's the same grooves in the top. They refitted that higher, and added extra glass, and it's that extra glass that made this car so appealing for the idea of bringing my uncle touring around West Cork here. First thing I have to do paperwork wise with the car, I hadn't expected this originally. I thought I'd be able to just do my negotiations at the docks, get it kind of make customs aware of the car coming in, and then restore it, and then bring it for registration. But that all actually has to happen within 30 days of arriving in the country. So I have a vehicle registration appointment at an NCT centre next week, and I have Chris Kajelson, a colleague of mine from volunteer service that I'm in, she also is a professional translator, so she's actually translating the documents for me for the inspection. And I actually have to have the car in not necessarily fully NCT-able, but in a fully viable condition. So it needs to be starting running with all the lights, wipers, etc. Because they don't import, they don't let you register like parts cars or shells or anything like that. So the car has to prove its capabilities. So fingers crossed. We'll fire up, or else we're going to have to delay that appointment. I don't think I'm going to get an engine in about 4 days, but hopefully things will be running well enough to get through that inspection. But it's funny for me to be sitting on this side of a Kadett, a car, an environment that I'm so used to for the last 20 years, but to be over on this side is a little unusual, but I have a feeling I'll get used to it pretty quickly. It's a 1300 engine, which seems quite small, but we know from Gina and the trip to Berlin last year, it's an extremely capable car, even in the lower capacities. So it should be able to move myself, my uncle, and perhaps his carer around quite successfully towards the end of the summer, and hopefully we'll get some decent weather for that. So I'm looking forward to Ivalo coming later, and we'll hopefully we'll fire up. I have a little bit of a funny plan for getting it started, actually. It involves George.